I never thought a tiny wooden box filled with books would become the center of a legal nightmare that would ultimately expose corruption, embezzlement, and fraud within my neighborhood's homeowner association. But here I was, sitting in my living room in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, staring at yet another certified letter demanding I return property that I no longer owned. It all started on a Wednesday morning in late February when I was getting ready for work. I'm a software engineer for a tech startup downtown, and I usually leave the house around 7:30 to beat the worst of the traffic. That particular morning, I grabbed my coffee and briefcase, locked the front door of my modest three-bedroom ranch house, and nearly tripped over a bright yellow structure that definitely had not been there the night before. Right there on my curb strip, the narrow strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street that technically belonged to the city, but that I was responsible for maintaining, stood a freshly painted little free library. You know the type, those cute miniature house structures on posts where people can take a book and leave a book. This one was maybe 3 feet tall, painted sunshine yellow with a white trim, and had a clear plexiglass door so you could see the books inside. A small plaque on the front read, Meadowbrook Estates Community Library. I stood there confused, my coffee cooling in the morning air, trying to figure out who had installed this thing and why they had chosen my property to do it. I had not requested it, had not been consulted, and certainly had not given permission. I walked around it, examining the installation. They had dug a substantial hole and set the post in concrete. This was not a temporary installation. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was out getting her newspaper. She waved at me and walked over, her small dog trotting beside her. "Morning, David." "I see you got one of the libraries," she said cheerfully. "I did not get anything," I replied, gesturing at the yellow structure. "This just appeared overnight like some kind of book-loving mushroom." Mrs. Chen laughed, but then her expression turned more serious. "Oh, you did not get the notice. The HOA sent out an email last week about their community beautification initiative. They are installing these little libraries on various curb strips throughout the neighborhood. I thought homeowners were supposed to be notified first, though. I never got any email, and nobody asked my permission to dig up my curb strip and install anything," I said, feeling my irritation rising. I was generally an easygoing person, but I did not appreciate people making decisions about my property without consulting me. "You should probably call Brenda, Mrs. Chen suggested, referring to Brenda Hutchins, the president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowner Association. Brenda was exactly what you would imagine when you picture a power-hungry HOA president. A 52-year-old woman with an asymmetrical blonde bob, always wearing athleisure where despite never appearing to actually exercise, and possessing an uncanny ability to spot code violations from 3 blocks away. I thanked Mrs. Chen and got in my car, already running late. I decided I would deal with this situation after work. The little library was not hurting anything, really, even if the installation method was questionable and unauthorized. That evening, I called the HOA office number, which rang through to Brenda's cell phone. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who believed they were far too important to be bothered with trivial matters. "Meadowbrook Estates HOA, Brenda speaking." "Hi, Brenda, this is David Morrison from 4782 Sagaro Drive. I woke up this morning to find that someone had installed a little library structure on my curb strip without my knowledge or permission. I wanted to understand what happened and why I was not consulted." There was a pause and I could hear papers rustling. Morrison, oh yes. The installation was completed as part of our Q1 Community Improvement Initiative. All residents were notified via email on February 14th. I never received that email, Brenda. And regardless, the curb strip is city property that I maintain. Even if the HOA wanted to install something there, should not the city and the property owner both be consulted? Her tone became noticeably cooler. The HOA bylaws give us authority over aesthetic and community improvement projects within the neighborhood boundaries. The curb strips fall within those boundaries. We have been very transparent about this initiative. Transparent would have been knocking on my door and asking if I minded having this installed. I am not trying to be difficult, but I think this was handled poorly. Your feedback is noted, Mr. Morrison. Is there anything else? I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. I bit back several responses that would not have been productive. No, that is all for now. She hung up without saying goodbye. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, feeling frustrated but deciding to let it go. The little library was fine, I supposed. It was not an eyesore, and if it encouraged reading in the neighborhood, that was positive. I would be the bigger person about the whole thing. Over the next few weeks, I occasionally glanced at the little library when I came and went. Sometimes books appeared inside, sometimes they disappeared. I never paid that much attention to who was using it, though I saw neighborhood kids browsing the selection a few times. It became part of the landscape, just another fixture of suburban life. Then, in mid-March, my company announced we would be organizing a volunteer day with a local elementary school that served a lower-income area on the other side of Phoenix. The school, Desert Rose Elementary, desperately needed resources, and our company had committed to helping however we could. I volunteered to be part of the organizing committee, and during one of our planning meetings, the principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, mentioned that they had been trying to create a reading corner in their playground but lacked the infrastructure to protect books from the elements. That is when the idea hit me. The little library on my curb strip would be perfect for their needs. It was sturdy, weather-resistant, and would provide exactly what they needed. Since I had not asked for it, had not wanted it, and had never given permission for its installation on my curb strip, I figured I had every right to donate it to someone who would actually appreciate and use it. That Saturday, I recruited 2 coworkers, rented a pickup truck, and headed to my house. The little library was surprisingly well built, but with some effort, we managed to dig up the concrete foundation and load the entire structure into the truck bed. I left the hole filled with dirt and reseeded the grass, making sure the area looked tidy. Then we drove across town to Desert Rose Elementary, where Mrs. Rodriguez and several teachers met us with enormous smiles. "This is wonderful," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her eyes actually tearing up a bit as we unloaded the structure. "The kids are going to be so excited." We installed the little library in a perfect spot near the playground, this time actually getting permission from the property owner first. Mrs. Rodriguez had already collected donations of children's books from parents and teachers, and we spent an hour stocking the library with colorful picture books, early readers, and middle-grade novels. By the time we finished, it looked like it had always belonged there. I took a photo of the completed installation, posted it on my personal social media with a caption about community service and giving back, and thought that was the end of the story. I had solved a problem for people who needed help, and I had removed an unwanted structure from my property. Win-win. I was wrong. The following Tuesday, I came home from work to find a note stuck to my front door. It was printed on official HOA letterhead and read, "Mr. Morrison, it has come to our attention that HOA property has been removed from 4782 Saguaro Drive without authorization. Please contact the HOA office immediately to discuss the return of this property. Failure to respond within 48 hours will result in fines and further action." I crumpled the note, uncrumpled it, read it again, and then laughed out loud. HOA property? They had installed it on city property without my permission, and now they were claiming ownership. This was absurd. I called the HOA office immediately. Brenda answered, and her voice was even icier than during our previous conversation. "Mr. Morrison, I assume you are calling about the notice." "I am calling because the notice is ridiculous, Brenda. That structure was installed on my curb strip without my permission. I donated it to a school that actually needed it. I do not understand why this is a problem." "You removed HOA property without authorization," she said, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "That little library cost the association nearly $800 to purchase and install. You had no right to remove it." "I had every right," I countered, keeping my voice level despite my growing anger. "You installed it without asking me. The curb strip is maintained by me, and you want to talk about rights. Where was my right to be consulted before you dug up the grass I mow and planted something I did not want? The bylaws clearly state." "I do not care what the bylaws state, Brenda. You cannot just install things on property without permission and then claim ownership. That is not how any of this works." There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was dangerously quiet. "Mr. Morrison, I am going to give you one opportunity to make this right. You will return the little library to its original location, professionally reinstalled at your expense, within 7 days. If you fail to do this, the HOA will fine you $500 with an additional $100 per day until the property is returned. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. This is theft of HOA property, and we will pursue all available legal remedies." "Then pursue them," I said, my patience finally snapping. "Because I am not returning something that I donated in good faith to people who needed it. That library is serving dozens of underprivileged kids right now. I am not taking that away from them because your ego is bruised. This is not about ego, Mr. Morrison. This is about property rights and following community rules. You will be hearing from our attorney." She hung up, and I stood there feeling like I had just stepped into an alternate dimension where common sense had ceased to exist. An $800 little library. That seemed extremely overpriced for what was essentially a wooden box on a post, but even if it was accurate, they had installed it without permission. Surely no judge would side with them on this. The next day, I received an email with a formal demand letter attached. It outlined the same demands Brenda had made over the phone, with additional threats about placing a lien on my property if I did not comply. The letter was signed by Richard Crenshaw, attorney at law, and had all the official-looking formatting designed to intimidate. I forwarded the email to my friend Jake, who happened to be a real estate attorney in Scottsdale. We had gone to college together, and while we did not see each other often, we had stayed in touch over the years. He called me that evening. "David, this is the most ridiculous thing I have read all week, and I deal with contract disputes for a living," Jake said, and I could hear the amusement in his voice. "They have no legal standing here. None. They installed something on city property without getting proper permits or your approval as the maintaining party. You had every right to remove it." That is what I thought, but I wanted to make sure I was not crazy. So what should I do? Write a response letter, be polite but firm. Explain that you did not authorize the installation, that they failed to follow proper procedures, and that you exercised your right to remove an unwanted structure from property you maintain. Offer to pay them for the materials if they can prove actual costs, but make it clear you will not be bullied by threats of fines or liens. Can they actually place a lien on my house over this? They can try, but it would not hold up in court. Look, David, I will draft a response letter for you. No charge. This is so absurd that I want to do it just for my own entertainment. But you should also file a complaint with the city about the unauthorized installation. Get ahead of this thing. I thanked Jake and felt better having a legal professional in my corner, even informally. The next morning, Jake sent me a beautifully crafted response letter that outlined all the reasons why the HOA's demands were without merit. I printed it, signed it, and sent it via certified mail to both the HOA office and their attorney. I thought that would be the end of it. Again, I was wrong. The HOA escalated quickly. Within a week, I received notice that I had been fined $500 for removal of community property. The fine notice came with another demand for the library's return and a new ultimatum: return it within 3 days or face daily fines of $100. I did not pay the fine. Instead, following Jake's advice, I filed a formal complaint with the City of Phoenix regarding the unauthorized installation on the curb strip. I also requested records of any permits the HOA had obtained for the installation. The city clerk I spoke with was sympathetic and said they would investigate. At the same time, I began doing research into the Meadowbrook Estates HOA and its finances. The bylaws were available online, and I spent several evenings reading through them. What I found was interesting. Yes, the HOA had broad authority over aesthetic matters within the community, but any expenditure over $500 required approval from the board at a properly noticed meeting. Any expenditure over $2,000 required a vote of the general membership. If the little library had truly cost $800 to purchase and install, and if multiple libraries had been installed throughout the neighborhood, as Brenda had mentioned, then this initiative should have been brought to the board and possibly the general membership. I started searching through HOA meeting minutes, which were sporadically posted on the community website. I could not find any mention of the little library project anywhere. This was getting more interesting by the day. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, which was scheduled for the first Tuesday in April. The meetings were technically open to all residents, though few people bothered to attend. They were held in the clubhouse near the community pool, a bland room with folding chairs and a long table at the front. I arrived 15 minutes early and took a seat in the back row. A handful of other residents trickled in, mostly older folks who seemed to be regulars. Brenda sat at the center of the table at the front, flanked by 4 board members I vaguely recognized from around the neighborhood. She noticed me immediately, and I saw her expression tighten. The meeting started with typical procedural matters: approval of last month's minutes, a treasurer's report that consisted of someone reading numbers from a spreadsheet without much context, and a discussion about pool maintenance. I waited patiently, taking notes. When they reached the open forum portion of the meeting where residents could bring up concerns, I raised my hand. Brenda's jaw clenched. "Yes, Mr. Morrison." I stood up, keeping my voice calm and professional. "Thank you. I want to discuss the little library initiative that was undertaken in February. Specifically, I would like to know when this project was approved by the board, what the total cost was, and why residents were not properly consulted before installations occurred on their maintained property." Brenda exchanged glances with the board members beside her. The little library project was part of our community beautification efforts. It was handled by the board as part of our normal operational authority. According to the bylaws, any expenditure over $500 requires board approval at a properly noticed meeting. I have reviewed the meeting minutes going back 6 months, and I cannot find any mention of this project. Can you point me to when it was discussed and approved? There was an uncomfortable silence. One of the board members, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses named Todd, cleared his throat. "Brenda, I do not actually remember voting on this. When did we approve the library project?" Brenda's face flushed slightly. "It was discussed informally at our January retreat. We did not need a formal vote because it fell under our general improvement budget." "There is no provision in the bylaws for an informal approval process," I said, still maintaining my calm tone. And if multiple libraries were installed at $800 each, as I was told, that is well over the $500 threshold. I would like to see the receipts and invoices for this project. We do not have to provide financial documentation to every resident who demands it, Brenda snapped. You are only asking because you are trying to justify your theft of HOA property. I am asking because I am a dues-paying member of this association, and I have a right to know how my money is being spent. I am also asking because an expensive structure was installed on my maintained curb strip without my permission, and when I donated it to a school in need, I was threatened with fines and legal action. None of this seems to follow proper procedures. Another board member, a woman in her 60s named Patricia, spoke up. Brenda, maybe we should just provide the documentation. I think David has a valid point about the process. I do not remember formally approving this project either. We are not going to let a resident who stole HOA property dictate how we operate, Brenda said, her voice rising. Mr. Morrison, you are out of order. Sit down. I am exercising my right to speak during open forum. I am not out of order. The meeting devolved from there. Brenda tried to move on to other business, but Todd and Patricia both insisted on discussing the library project further. It became clear that Brenda had undertaken the project largely on her own authority, without proper board approval, and that she had been vague about the costs involved. How many libraries did we install total? Todd asked, looking genuinely confused. Brenda hesitated. Six libraries in strategic locations throughout the community. At $800 each, that is $4,800. Brenda, that absolutely required a membership vote, that is well over our threshold. The total project was not $4,800, that is an estimate, the actual cost was lower. How much lower? Patricia asked. I would need to check the exact invoices. Then please check them and have that information available for our next meeting, Todd said firmly. I think we need full transparency on this project, especially given the situation with Mr. Morrison. Brenda shot me a look of pure venom, but she agreed to provide the documentation. The meeting ended shortly after, and I left feeling like I had accomplished something, even if I had probably made an enemy for life. Over the next week, something interesting happened. I started receiving calls and visits from other neighbors. Apparently, word had spread about the confrontation at the board meeting, and several other residents had their own grievances with the HOA. Mrs. Chen stopped by with homemade cookies and thanked me for speaking up. A man from 3 streets over named Mike told me that Brenda had fined him repeatedly for his lawn being a 1/4 inch too tall, despite him mowing every weekend. Another neighbor, Sandra, said she had been trying to get approval to repaint her house for 8 months, with Brenda finding new reasons to deny the application each time. She runs this HOA like her personal fiefdom, Sandra said, sitting on my patio and sipping iced tea. We have all been too intimidated to push back, but watching you stand up to her at that meeting, I do not know, it made me realize we do not have to just accept it. I just wanted to know where my HOA dues were going, I said, and I did not appreciate being threatened over something I had every right to do. Most of us did not even know about the little library project until they showed up installed, Mike added. He had joined us, along with Mrs. Chen and 2 other neighbors. I got the email Brenda mentioned, but it was not asking for approval or input. It just said the libraries were being installed as a done deal. This impromptu gathering turned into something more organized. We decided to form a group of concerned residents who would attend HOA meetings together and push for greater transparency. We created a group chat and started sharing information. Over the next few days, that group chat grew to include 23 households, nearly a 1/4 of the neighborhood. Meanwhile, I received another certified letter from the HOA attorney, reiterating their demands and increasing the fine total to $1,200. I forwarded it to Jake, who sent back a laughing emoji and told me to ignore it. "They are posturing," he said when I called him. "They know they do not have a case, but they are hoping you will fold under pressure. Do not give them the satisfaction." The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for early May, and our group of concerned residents planned to attend en masse. But before that meeting could happen, something significant occurred. The city of Phoenix completed their investigation into the unauthorized installation on my curb strip. I received a letter from the city informing me that the HOA had never obtained the required permit for installing structures on city-owned curb strips. The city took a dim view of this, as it set a precedent for others to install things without proper approval. The letter stated that the city would be sending a formal notice to the HOA requiring them to obtain proper permits for any existing installations, or remove them within 60 days. Furthermore, the city confirmed that as the maintaining party of the curb strip, I had had every right to remove the unauthorized structure. The city backed my actions completely. I forwarded this letter to the HOA office and their attorney, along with a brief note stating that I would not be paying any fines and that I considered the matter closed. I also posted a carefully worded message in our neighborhood group chat explaining what the city had said. The response from Brenda was swift and predictable. She sent an email to all residents claiming that I had filed frivolous complaints with the city to harass the HOA, and that my actions were damaging community cohesion. She also announced that the next board meeting would include a vote on whether to pursue legal action against me for theft, vandalism, and harassment. That was a mistake on her part. The overreach was so obvious that even residents who had been neutral started questioning what was happening. The group chat exploded with messages, and more people joined every day. The May board meeting had to be moved to a larger room because more than 60 residents showed up. The clubhouse could not accommodate everyone, so they relocated to the community center's main hall. I had never seen so many of my neighbors in one place. Brenda looked rattled when she saw the crowd, but she called the meeting to order and worked through the initial procedural items quickly, clearly wanting to get to the part where she could attack me publicly. But Todd, the board member with glasses, had other ideas. During the treasurer's report, he interrupted. "Before we proceed, I need to address something. At our last meeting, we requested full financial documentation for the little library project. Brenda, did you bring that information?" Brenda shuffled papers. "I have some of the invoices here, but not all of them. The project involved multiple vendors and I am still compiling everything. It has been a month, Brenda. How difficult is it to gather receipts for a project you managed? I have been busy with many other HOA matters. I will have everything compiled soon." Patricia, the other dissenting board member, leaned forward. "Brenda, I went ahead and did some research on my own. I contacted the company whose logo was on the little library that was on Mr. Morrison's curb strip. Do you know what they told me? They told me those libraries retail for $250 and they have no record of our HOA ordering 6 units. The room went very quiet. Brenda's face flushed deep red. "I do not know what you are implying, Patricia, but I find it highly inappropriate that you went behind my back. I am implying that you told us each library cost $800 to purchase and install, but the actual retail cost is $250. Even with professional installation, we are looking at maybe $400 per unit maximum. So where did the other $400 per library go? Where did the supposed $4,800 budget actually go?" The crowd started murmuring. I sat in the middle of the room, watching this unfold with fascination. This had gone way beyond my little library dispute. Brenda stood up, her hands shaking slightly. I do not have to sit here and be accused of whatever you are suggesting. I have given years of service to this community, and I will not be disrespected like this. Then show us the receipts, Todd said quietly. Show us the invoices, the payments, the paper trail. If everything was above board, this should be easy to clear up. I will not be bullied into. Brenda, we are not bullying you. We are asking for basic financial transparency. That is our job as board members. If you cannot or will not provide this documentation, then we have a serious problem. One of the other board members, a man who had been silent through both meetings I had attended, suddenly spoke up. I have been uncomfortable for a while now. Brenda, you handle all the finances personally. You are the only one with access to the HOA bank accounts. You prepare the treasurer reports without any oversight. I thought we were just being efficient, but now I am wondering if that was a mistake. You are all turning on me because of him, Brenda said, pointing at me. He stole HOA property, and instead of holding him accountable, you are attacking me. This is unbelievable. Actually, the city confirmed David had every right to remove that structure, Patricia said. We all received the letter from the city. They said we never got proper permits. Did you get permits, Brenda? Brenda did not answer. Instead, she grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. I am not going to sit here and be treated like a criminal. This meeting is adjourned. You do not get to adjourn the meeting unilaterally, Todd called after her. Brenda, if you leave, we will continue without you. She left anyway, and the door slammed behind her. The room erupted in conversation. Todd had to call for order several times before people settled down. Okay, this is unprecedented, but we need to proceed, Todd said, looking overwhelmed. I am going to make a motion that we suspend Brenda's access to HOA financial accounts pending a full audit of all expenditures over the past 2 years. Do I have a second? Second, Patricia said immediately. The 3 remaining board members voted unanimously in favor. Then they voted to hire an independent accounting firm to conduct the audit, with results to be presented at a special meeting in 6 weeks. I left that meeting feeling vindicated but also concerned. What had started as a dispute over an unwanted little library had uncovered what looked like potential financial mismanagement, or worse. Several neighbors stopped me on the way to my car to thank me for speaking up and to express their shock at what had unfolded. I had no idea, Mrs. Chen said, looking genuinely distressed. I have been paying HOA dues for 12 years. What has she been doing with our money? I did not have an answer, but I suspected we would find out soon enough. Over the next 6 weeks, the neighborhood was buzzing with speculation. Brenda stopped coming to the community pool and the clubhouse. Someone reported seeing her leaving her house with suitcases, though her car remained in the driveway, so she had not moved out completely. The remaining board members took over day-to-day HOA operations and were surprised by how disorganized the records were. Todd called me personally to apologize. David, I owe you an apology. You were right to question things, and I should have been paying closer attention all along. We trusted Brenda to handle things professionally, and that was naive. I just wanted to donate a little library to some kids who needed it, I said. I never intended for any of this to happen. Well, I am glad it did. We needed someone to force us to look at what was really going on. The audit results were scheduled to be presented at a special meeting in mid-June. That meeting had even higher attendance than the previous one. The accounting firm sent a representative, a serious woman in her 40s named Miss Delgado, who set up a laptop and projector to walk everyone through her findings. Brenda did not attend. Her absence spoke volumes. Miss Delgado's presentation was damning. Over the past 3 years, approximately $67,000 in HOA funds had been misappropriated. The little library project had been budgeted at $4,800, but only around $900 had actually been spent on the libraries themselves. The rest had been diverted to personal expenses, home renovations, a timeshare in Sedona, car payments, and numerous retail purchases. The little library project was just the tip of the iceberg. Brenda had been inflating costs on multiple projects, pocketing the difference, and in some cases, billing the HOA for projects that had never happened at all. She had been clever about keeping the amount small enough per transaction to avoid triggering concerns, but over 3 years, it had added up significantly. "This is embezzlement," someone shouted from the crowd. "We need to call the police." Todd nodded grimly. "We have already consulted with an attorney. We will be filing a police report and pursuing both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds." The room erupted again. I sat there feeling stunned. I had expected maybe some financial sloppiness, some poor record-keeping, but not systematic theft over multiple years. All because I had donated a little wooden library to an elementary school. Miss Delgado continued her presentation, showing line by line how Brenda had manipulated the books. She had been the only person with access to the accounts, the only person who signed checks, and the only person who prepared financial reports. It was a complete failure of oversight. After the presentation ended, Patricia stood up and addressed the room. "We have failed you as a board. We should have demanded transparency and regular audits. We should have questioned expenditures and required proper documentation. We did not do our jobs, and as a result, our neighbor stole from all of you for years. Todd and I are going to stay on the board to see this through and help recover what was stolen, but we would understand if you want to recall us." There was some discussion, but ultimately the membership voted to keep Todd and Patricia on the board, along with the third member who had spoken up at the previous meeting. They recalled the fourth board member, who had been essentially useless throughout. Several residents volunteered to join the board and help implement better oversight procedures. The next day, Todd filed a police report with the Phoenix Police Department. 2 detectives came to the community center to interview board members and review the audit findings. I was interviewed as well, since the little library dispute had been the catalyst for uncovering the embezzlement. Detective Sarah Ramirez was thorough and professional. "Mr. Morrison, can you walk me through exactly what happened, starting from when you first noticed the little library on your curb strip?" I told her everything, from that first morning in February through the board meetings and the audit. She took detailed notes and collected copies of all the correspondence between me and the HOA, including Brenda's threats and demand letters. "And you donated this little library to Desert Rose Elementary?" she asked. "Yes, to their playground. They still have it. It is being used by kids every day." Detective Ramirez smiled slightly. "That is actually nice. So essentially, Miss Hutchins installed something without proper authorization, inflated the cost to embezzle HOA funds, and then tried to bully you into returning it to cover up the fraud." "That is what it looks like, yes. Miss Hutchins made a significant error in judgment when she escalated this dispute instead of just letting it go. If she had written off one library, no one would have looked closely at the finances, but her ego got in the way." "Will she be arrested?" I asked. "We need to complete our investigation, but based on what I have seen so far, yes. Embezzlement of this magnitude is a serious crime. We will coordinate with the prosecutor's office." The police investigation moved faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, detectives had gathered enough evidence to present to the county prosecutor. In early July, Brenda Hutchins was arrested at her home and charged with multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The local news picked up the story, and it made headlines. HOA president arrested for embezzling thousands from homeowners. My phone blew up with messages from neighbors and friends who had seen the news. Several news outlets reached out to interview me, but I declined. I had never wanted attention. I just wanted to do something good for kids who needed help. The criminal case moved through the system over the next several months. Brenda's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not inclined to be lenient. The case went to trial in October, and I was called to testify about the little library dispute and how it had led to the discovery of the embezzlement. Sitting in the witness box was surreal. Brenda sat at the defense table, looking smaller and older than I remembered. Her attorney tried to paint me as someone with a grudge who had blown things out of proportion, but the prosecutor's cross-examination made it clear that I had simply asked reasonable questions and exercised my legitimate rights. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Brenda guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge was unsparing in his criticism. Miss Hutchins, you held a position of trust within your community, and you violated that trust systematically and repeatedly for personal gain. You stole from your neighbors, people who relied on you to manage their collective resources responsibly. When you were questioned, rather than come clean, you attempted to intimidate and bully the person who dared to ask questions. Your conduct was reprehensible. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution of $67,000, plus legal fees and costs. The judge also imposed a fine and ordered her to perform community service after her release. As the bailiff led her away, I felt no satisfaction, only a sense of sadness that it had come to this. The civil lawsuit the HOA filed against Brenda was almost anticlimactic. With the criminal conviction, liability was clear. The court ordered her to pay restitution, though actually collecting the money proved difficult. Brenda had spent most of what she had stolen, and her assets were limited. The HOA eventually recovered about $30,000 through the sale of her timeshare and garnishment of her retirement accounts. It was not the full amount, but it was something. Throughout all of this, I stayed in touch with Mrs. Rodriguez at Desert Rose Elementary. The little library on their playground had become a beloved fixture. Kids used it every day, swapping books and discovering new stories. The school had organized a Friends of the Library parent group that kept it stocked with fresh books and even organized reading events around it. You have no idea how much this has meant to our students, Mrs. Rodriguez told me when I visited the school in November. We have kids who never wanted to read before who now ask if they can take books home. One little girl told me the library is magic because it always has the perfect book waiting for her. Standing there watching kids browse the little yellow library during recess, I felt like the entire nightmare with the HOA had been worth it. This was what that structure was meant for, not as a vanity project for an HOA president to embezzle funds, but as a genuine resource for children who needed access to books. Back in Meadowbrook Estates, the HOA underwent significant reforms. The new board implemented strict financial controls. Dual signatures required on all checks, monthly financial reports reviewed by an independent committee, annual audits by a professional firm, and quarterly membership meetings with full transparency. They also revised the bylaws to require explicit approval from affected property owners before any installations on maintained areas. The remaining 5 little libraries in the neighborhood stayed in place after the HOA obtained proper permits from the city. Residents who had them on their curb strips were formally asked if they wanted to keep them, and most said yes. The libraries had actually become popular once people knew they had been installed legitimately. As for me, I went back to my normal life. I continued working at my tech startup, mowing my lawn, and being a generally quiet neighbor. But I had learned something important through this experience. Sometimes standing up for what is right, even over something as small as a little library, can have far-reaching consequences. I had not set out to uncover embezzlement or bring down a corrupt HOA president. I had just wanted to give something useful to kids who needed it. The whole situation taught me that HOAs, while created with good intentions to maintain community standards, can become problematic when oversight is lacking and power is concentrated in the wrong hands. Brenda had been enabled by a passive board and disengaged membership. Everyone had just trusted that things were being handled properly without actually verifying. Mrs. Chen baked me cookies several times over the months that followed, always saying she was grateful someone had finally spoken up. Mike, Sandra, and several other neighbors became good friends. We started having occasional block parties and neighborhood barbecues, something that had never happened before. In a strange way, the scandal had brought the community closer together. I also stayed involved with Desert Rose Elementary. My company's volunteer program continued supporting the school, and I joined the Friends of the Library parent group as a community volunteer. We organized book drives and fundraisers, expanding the program to include classroom libraries and reading incentives. It felt good to be part of something positive that had come from such a contentious beginning. One evening in December, almost a year after that first morning when I had stumbled over the yellow library on my curb strip, I was sitting on my patio watching the sunset. The spot where the library had been installed was just grass now, neatly maintained and unmarked. You would never know anything had been there. My phone buzzed with a message from Jake, my attorney friend. "Hey, saw the final judgment came through in the HOA civil case. Congratulations on the closure. Still the most entertaining case I have followed in years. You should write a book about it." I laughed and typed back, "No thanks. I am happy to return to boring suburban anonymity." But Jake was not entirely wrong. The story was remarkable in how a small act of defiance against an unreasonable demand had unraveled years of corruption. It was a reminder that ordinary people doing ordinary things, like donating a little library to kids who needed it, could sometimes spark extraordinary change. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA eventually stabilized under its new leadership. Dues were used appropriately for actual community maintenance and improvements. Decisions were made transparently with input from residents. It became what an HOA should be, a functional organization that served the community rather than controlling it. I never regretted donating that little library. Every time I visited Desert Rose Elementary and saw kids excitedly picking out books, I knew I had made the right choice. The yellow library that had caused so much trouble in my neighborhood had found its true purpose on that playground, bringing joy and literacy to children who might not otherwise have easy access to books. As for Brenda, I occasionally wondered how she was doing but never followed up. Her story was a cautionary tale about what happens when someone lets power and greed override their integrity. She had destroyed her reputation, lost her freedom, and hurt people who had trusted her, all for money that she had spent on frivolous things that brought no lasting value. The contrast could not have been sharper. She had spent thousands of dollars embezzled from her neighbors on personal luxuries that were now gone, while a $250 little library that she had tried to reclaim out of spite was enriching the lives of children every single day. In January, the HOA formally dropped all fines and demands against me. Todd sent me a letter of apology on behalf of the board, acknowledging that I had been right all along and thanking me for pushing for accountability. He also mentioned that they had established a new community service award in recognition of residents who went above and beyond to help others, and that I would be the first recipient at the annual meeting in March. I appreciated the gesture, though I found it somewhat ironic. I had not been trying to be a hero or make a statement. I had just been trying to help some kids and refusing to be bullied by someone who was wrong. The fact that it had escalated into a major scandal was not something I had anticipated or desired. The award ceremony at the March HOA meeting was nice but awkward. I was not comfortable being the center of attention, and several people gave speeches about my courage and integrity that made me want to sink into the floor. But Mrs. Rodriguez came with several students from Desert Rose Elementary, and they presented me with a handmade thank you poster covered in drawings and messages from kids who used the library. That poster, now framed and hanging in my home office, meant more to me than any official recognition. "Thank you for the magic library," one kid had written in green crayon. "You are the best," another had scrawled next to a drawing of the little yellow structure surrounded by hearts. Those messages reminded me why any of this had mattered. Beyond the legal battles, the financial audits, the criminal trials, and the neighborhood drama, there was a simple truth. I had helped kids access books, and that was worth all the hassle. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized the whole experience had changed me in subtle ways. I was less willing to accept "that is just how things are" as an answer. I was more engaged with my community and more aware of how organizations functioned. I had learned that asking reasonable questions and standing up for what is right was not causing trouble. It was being a responsible member of society. The little library dispute had started as an annoyance on a random Wednesday morning and had spiraled into something much larger than I ever could have imagined. It exposed corruption, led to criminal prosecution, reformed a dysfunctional HOA, and brought a community together. And at the center of it all was a simple act of generosity, giving away something I did not want to people who would truly value it. If I had known on that February morning where this would all lead, would I have still donated the library to Desert Rose Elementary? Absolutely, without hesitation. Because sometimes doing the right thing is complicated and messy and leads to unexpected consequences, but that does not make it any less right. The yellow little library still stands on the playground at Desert Rose Elementary, weathered now by months of sun and use, but still sturdy and functional. Kids still browse its shelves during recess, still take books home, still discover the joy of reading. That library, which caused so much controversy and exposed so much wrongdoing, has probably done more good than Brenda Hutchins' entire tenure as HOA president. And that, ultimately, is the real ending to this story. Not the criminal conviction, not the recovered funds, not the HOA reforms, but the ongoing impact of one small act of kindness that refused to be undone, even in the face of threats and intimidation. The little library that started this whole mess is exactly where it should be, serving exactly the purpose it was meant for. Sometimes standing your ground over something small leads to something much bigger. Sometimes refusing to be bullied exposes corruption that needs to be addressed. And sometimes a little yellow box full of books becomes the catalyst for justice, reform, and community transformation. I learned all of that from a little library I never asked for, never wanted, and definitely never expected to become the most significant object in my neighborhood's recent history. But that is how life works sometimes. The most important moments often come from the most unexpected places, wrapped in the most unlikely packages. In the end, I got exactly what I wanted. Those kids at Desert Rose Elementary got their library. Brenda faced consequences for her crimes. The HOA became more accountable and transparent, and my curb strip went back to being just a patch of grass that I mow every weekend. Simple, quiet, and exactly as it should be.